When nature strikes, calm moments can turn to chaos in an instant. From the snowy cliffs of Siberia to Montana's deep woods, from Alaska's stormy rivers to the frozen seas of Svalbard, bear encounters prove no place is truly safe. Camps, cabins, and waterways can become sudden battlegrounds between humans and wildlife. Each story is raw, shocking, and unforgettable. In this video, we'll explore 7 terrifying bear attack survival stories that demonstrate how quickly the wild reclaims its territory. August 12, 2025 began warm and still in Wyoming's Bighorn Mountains, where the tall trees of pine filled the air with their sweet scent. Families filled the RV park with laughter and smoke from campfires, thinking only of food and rest after long drives through the hills. Jack Reynolds, a traveler who enjoyed the quiet outdoors, parked his camper among many others. He spent the day talking with friends, setting up chairs, and enjoying the late summer evening. The peaceful setting gave no sign of what would come when darkness fell. As the sun slipped away, the park grew quiet, the glow of lanterns fading one by one, until only the crackle of fires and the buzz of insects filled the night. But the wild was always near, even in a place full of campers. As the moon rose high, a hulking shadow stirred at the edge of the forest. It was a grizzly, large and restless, its nose lifted to catch the smell of food left in coolers and scraps from the evening meals. Hunger pushed it closer, paws crunching gravel as it stepped into the edge of the park. At first, no one noticed, the hum of generators and faint laughter masking its approach. But the moment it lunged into the rows of campers, peace turned into panic. Its roar split the air as it tore into the side of a camper, the sound of metal bending echoing across the park. Jack's neighbor, Marissa, was the first caught in its path. Her camper door was ripped away in seconds, flung aside like paper. Supplies scattered across the ground as the beast clawed at her belongings, sending plastic, fabric, and food tumbling into the gravel. Marissa's scream pierced the night, waking families in nearby tents. Her son, Eli, clung tight to their golden retriever, Daisy, as the animal circled closer, the dog barking wildly. The bear's eyes glowed in the beam of flashlights as it turned toward them, its heavy body blocking any chance of escape. Jack, hearing the chaos, rushed forward with only what he had nearby. He grabbed a flashlight and a metal pan, slamming them together to make as much noise as possible. The clanging echoed off the trees, sharp against the night, but the grizzly did not back away. Instead, it swung toward him, crashing into the side of his RV with enough force to dent the frame and rattle the windows. The ground shook beneath its weight, each paw leaving deep marks in the gravel. Inside the tents, children cried while adults shouted for others to take cover. The park was no longer a place of safety. It had become a battlefield of fear. The grizzly's rage tore through more tents, its claws shredding canvas and scattering supplies into the night. Families scrambled for safety, some hiding in cars, others pulling children behind overturned tables. Sparks flashed when the beast shoved at a stove, flames flaring before fading in the chaos. Jack's arms shook as he kept banging the pan, his flashlight beam darting wildly across the ground. Every second stretched, the bear circling, growling deep in its throat, ready to strike again. The campers held their breath, their hearts racing as they waited for something to break the terror of the moment. The grizzly stood in the middle of the RV park, its massive body lit in flashes by beams of light and glowing embers from broken stoves. Families huddled in cars and campers, the silence of fear broken only by the heavy snorts of the predator. Then from the hills, coyotes began to howl, their cries sharp and eerie, carrying through the night. The sound made the bear hesitate, its head turning toward the tree line. In that pause, a camper pressed the horn of a truck, the long blast filling the valley. The combined noise startled the animal. With a deep growl, it swung one last time at a tent before lumbering back into the darkness of the forest, leaving wreckage in its path. The air after its retreat was thick with smoke and fear. Jack lowered his pan and flashlight, his arms trembling from exhaustion. Around him, the camp was unrecognizable. Coolers lay broken, food scattered across the gravel, tents ripped open like paper. Marissa clutched her son, tears streaking her face as Daisy whimpered against her chest. Families emerged slowly, their movements cautious, as though the beast might return at any moment. The silence that followed the chaos felt almost heavier than the attack itself, with every sound from the forest stirring fresh waves of tension. When the danger had passed, the work of survival began. Injuries were checked, and wounds wrapped in torn fabric. Eli's arm was bruised from being pulled too quickly, and Daisy's paw bled where broken glass had cut it. Tobias, another camper, had been knocked down in the rush, his ribs sore but not broken. Together, they gathered what supplies had not been destroyed. Flashlights flickered across bent metal, collapsed chairs, and the claw marks carved deep into camper doors. The marks told the story with no words needed. The wild had come too close that night. Hours later, as the first gray light of morning spread across the Bighorn Mountains, rangers arrived. They stepped carefully through the wreckage, their eyes scanning for fresh tracks. The bear's prints led back into the forest, wide and deep, proof of its enormous size. Rangers explained that food left in coolers and scattered scraps had likely drawn it in, the smell too strong for any animal to ignore. They warned that such encounters would grow more common as bears searched farther for meals in the late summer season. Campers nodded in silence, their eyes drifting back to the torn tents and broken campers. Repairs took days, but the scars lasted longer. The RV park was cleared and cleaned, though claw marks remained visible on metal and wood. Families spoke of the fear that had gripped them, how even the strongest locks and walls had felt fragile against a single predator. For Jack, the memory of standing in the glow of his flashlight, noise his only weapon, stayed sharper than any cut. Marissa kept Daisy close for weeks, while Eli's nightmares replayed the moment the beast circled their tent. The lesson spread quickly across nearby towns. Never leave food unattended. Never forget that the wilderness can encroach on human territory without warning. The Bighorn Mountains stood as beautiful as ever, but for those who lived that night, beauty would forever carry the shadow of the grizzly's roar. June 21st, 2023, carried the long light of the solstice across the Alaskan wilderness, where Mason Whitaker and his brother Kyle camped by a salmon river. Raised in the north, the two had spent many summers fishing together, but that evening brought attention they did not expect. Their coolers brimmed with fresh salmon, the smell drifting into the forest. Around them, firelight flickered against stacked gear and tackle boxes, the crackle of burning wood echoing in the still air. The brothers felt safe, but deep in the shadows, another presence had caught the scent. From the riverbank, a massive brown bear pushed through the brush. Its body was broad, with muscles shifting under thick fur. Its eyes were locked on the camp. It lumbered closer, head swinging side to side, nose testing the air. In a burst of motion, it charged straight into their supplies. Coolers toppled, sending fish spilling across the gravel, and tackle boxes flew like toys as the beast swept them aside. The crash of breaking wood and the roar of the predator drowned out the fire's gentle crackle. Sparks burst upward as the camp became a storm of chaos. Mason bolted for the canoe tied along the bank, the cold current rushing beneath it. He leapt inside, hoping distance would save him, but the animal followed with a speed that froze the blood in his veins. Its massive paw lashed out, striking the canoe and tipping it violently. Water surged over the sides, soaking Mason as he clung desperately to the edge, the river threatening to swallow him. The bear lunged again, teeth snapping inches from his grasp, its weight rocking the vessel back and forth. Every splash of water carried the risk of dragging him under. On the shore, Kyle reacted with desperate speed. He seized a paddle and swung with every ounce of strength, aiming at the beast's head. Wood cracked against fur, the force enough to make it pause but not retreat. The bear wheeled back with a furious roar, its claws carving deep into the gravel. Kyle stood his ground, striking again and again, each swing buying only seconds. His muscles ached, his breath came ragged, yet still the animal pressed forward, its hunger unshaken. The fire sparks blew across the scene, flashes of red light dancing against its eyes. In the chaos, Mason reached for a flare gun strapped to the canoe's side. His fingers fumbled in the icy water, but at last he pulled it free. He struck it hard, the flare bursting with sudden fire, its red glow cutting through smoke and darkness. The bear froze, startled by the sudden blaze, its head turning as the flare hissed and spat. It stepped back, eyes narrowing. Then with a final snort, it retreated into the forest shadows. Branches cracked and snapped as its bulk vanished into the trees, leaving behind the shattered remains of the camp. The brothers, soaked and bleeding, could only stare at the wreckage. Coolers were ripped open, crates smashed, barrels overturned, and the riverbank scarred by claw marks. The night that began with celebration had ended in chaos, leaving them trembling and breathless beneath the solstice sky, knowing the danger had only passed for now. May 15th, 2024 began with a misty haze curling over the ridges of the Great Smoky Mountains, where Leo Simmons, an amateur photographer, climbed into a rustic wooden treehouse. He had built his trip around capturing the bloom of spring flowers from a high vantage point, Carrying his camera gear, a small pack of snacks, and a lantern, the perch seemed safe, suspended among branches and supported by old beams that creaked but held strong. From a distance, the forest appeared peaceful, its silence broken only by the sounds of birds and the distant rush of wind through the leaves. Yet even in places that feel secure, danger can rise silently from below. Late afternoon settled over the ridge when the first sign of trouble appeared. Drawn by the faint scent of food left behind, a large black bear wandered from the forest floor to the tree's base. Its nose twitched, nostrils flaring as it caught the smell of crumbs and wrappers carried by the air. The animal circled the supports with quiet determination, its claws scraping at bark and wood, each sound echoing upward. The treehouse shook slightly as it leaned into the beams, testing the structure that stood between it and the source of the smell. Leo felt the tremors under his feet as the bear began climbing, its dark shape rising steadily along the support posts. The sound of claws gouging into wood grew sharper, followed by deep growls carried into the thin air. The structure swayed violently as the weight of the predator bore down on it, beams groaning and splinters shooting free. Camera lenses rattled in their bags and tripods toppled to the floor. The photographer's heart pounded as the safety of height crumbled into false comfort. The bear pressed upward with power, reaching the small platform and swiping at the railing. Boards cracked, fragments flying into the mist below. One strike sent Leo sliding across the planks, his body scraping against rough wood. His backpack tore open, scattering food wrappers and equipment across the floor before spilling over the side into the void. The bear lunged at the movement, claws tearing through the edge, shaking the entire perch so hard that beams creaked as though about to snap. In desperation, Leo seized the lantern that swung from a nail above. He turned it wildly, sparks bursting into the dim air as the flame flared. The sudden flash startled the predator, its eyes narrowing as it swiped again. But the blow missed its mark, and with a stumble on the slick railing, the bear lost its balance. It crashed downward, twisting violently before landing with a heavy thud on the ground below. A frustrated roar echoed through the trees as it paced briefly, then retreated into the dense shadows of the forest. Leo collapsed against the floor, his hands trembling, his skin stung by splinters and bruises from the fall across the planks. The quiet returned, broken only by the faint creak of the treehouse and his ragged breath. The black bear was gone, but the wreckage left behind made clear that even places lifted high above the ground offered no safety once hunger pushed a predator to climb. The night in the Smoky Mountains did not return to calm even after the black bear disappeared into the forest. Leo Simmons lay on the treehouse floor, his hands still shaking, his body aching from bruises and cuts. The old structure groaned under the damage, splintered beams bending from the weight of the attack. Around him, the remains of his gear were gone, scattered into the dark woods below. The air carried the sharp scent of lantern smoke, mixed with the smell of wood shavings and sweat. Although the danger had passed, the silence that followed held a weight of fear heavier than the roar of the animal. Leo dragged himself to the corner, pressing against the cracked wall of the treehouse as his breathing slowed. Blood from small cuts marked his arms, and wooden splinters stung with every movement. His camera bag had fallen to the ground, leaving him with little more than the lantern and the torn straps of his pack. The emptiness of the perch struck him harder than the wounds. What had seemed a safe hideaway now felt like a trap hanging weakly in the trees. Each creak of the board sounded like a warning that the structure could fail at any moment. As the night deepened, Leo stayed awake, staring at the shadows below. He knew that black bears often returned to the same place if food was available, and the smell of wrappers and spilled supplies might lure them back. His eyes scanned the darkness, searching for movement, while every sound of snapping branches made his heart leap. The fear of the animal's return held him rigid, unable to rest. Hours passed with the forest pressing in, silent except for the wind brushing through the ridges. When dawn finally broke, the forest appeared calmer. Mist drifted through the trees, hiding the scars of the struggle below. Leo gathered the strength to climb down carefully, his body sore, legs stiff, and hands raw. The ground around the supports told the story clearly. Deep claw marks etched into the wood, gear scattered in the dirt, and footprints stamped into the soil circled the tree like a reminder of what had come so close. His camera lay broken among the leaves, lenses shattered, and food wrappers were torn open and scattered far from the site. Making his way down the ridge, Leo leaned heavily on branches for support. His body was tired, and each step reminded him of the close brush with danger. By midday, he reached a ranger station where his cuts were cleaned, and his story was shared with wide-eyed interest. Officials later explained that leaving food inside or near structures often attracts bears, especially in the spring when hunger drives them toward readily available food. The treehouse had offered no protection, only a false sense of safety. In the weeks after, Leo carried the memory of the attack as sharply as the scars left on his arms. He had set out to capture flowers, but instead learned how fragile a man's perch can be when nature climbs upward. The wilderness had reminded him that height and walls mean little when instinct drives a predator to reach. February 18th, 2025, began with cold air moving across the snow-covered slopes of Ussuri, where families gathered at a resort to enjoy winter games and warm drinks. The open-air cafes were full of laughter, mugs steaming on the tables while children ran across the terraces. For most, the day felt safe and full of cheer, the kind of afternoon where worries seemed far away. Yet in the nearby forest, something stirred, a presence far larger than the guests could imagine. Hidden by the trees and drawn by the smell of food, a predator moved closer to the edge of the settlement. Without warning, the perimeter fence gave way with a loud crack as an enormous Russian grizzly forced its way through. The sound shattered the calm, and in seconds, chaos spread across the square. Tables toppled as the beast's heavy paws struck the ground, glass splintered into shards, and trays of food scattered across the snow. Guests rushed in every direction, the playful air of moments earlier replaced with raw terror. The massive animal moved with speed and power, its frame dwarfing the flimsy chairs and fragile structures built for leisure. Each stride tore through the cafe grounds, sending chairs flying and tents collapsing. Screams filled the air as parents clutched their children and workers tried to hide behind counters. The predator's roar rolled through the crowd, louder than the crashing furniture, louder even than the shouts of panic. In the middle of the storm of bodies, one man reacted with instinct rather than retreat. Dmitry Volkov, a father visiting with his young daughter, pulled her close as the creature swung its head in their direction. In a split second, he placed himself between her and the rushing claws. The impact was brutal. The bear's swipe caught him squarely, driving him back against a cafe table that split beneath the weight. Wood snapped, plates shattered, and his body crumpled to the ground. Blood marked the snow where he fell, while his daughter was pulled back by strangers trying to shield her from the same fate. The crowd's cries rose higher, hands waving and objects thrown in desperation to divert the predator's attention. The beast turned wildly, rattled by the movement and sound. For a moment it hesitated, its bulk looming over the wreckage before pulling back from the wave of resistance. With one last roar, it bounded toward the broken fence, crashing through the opening it had made. Branches snapped as it vanished back into the forest, leaving the resort silent but scarred. In its wake, the cafe square lay in ruins. Tables were overturned, chairs splintered, glass glittered across the ground, and the smell of smoke and spilled food lingered heavy in the cold. Guests huddled together, trembling, as emergency responders rushed onto the scene. Amid the wreckage, Dmitry lay motionless, his sacrifice the only reason his daughter had been spared. The bright afternoon had turned to tragedy in minutes, a day meant for rest ending in blood and sorrow. The resort was left silent except for the echo of screams that still hung in the cold air. Guests huddled close together, many crying, others simply staring in shock at the overturned tables and scattered belongings. Snow was trampled flat where people had fled, streaked with red where the father had fallen. Responders rushed to his side, working quickly, but the force of the strike had left wounds too deep to mend. Neighbors carried his daughter away, her small hands clutching tightly to a scarf, her wide eyes fixed on the broken scene behind her. The resort staff moved quickly to guide visitors inside the lodges and secure the grounds. The smell of food still lingered across the square, and every sound of the forest brought fear that the beast could return. Sirens pierced the air as vehicles from the nearest town arrived, their lights flashing across snow and glass. Medics lifted the fallen man onto a stretcher, their faces grim, while others carried those who had been hurt in the rush to escape. Panic had left sprains, cuts, and bruises scattered among the crowd, the chaos claiming more than one victim. As the night deepened, news spread quickly across the region. Word of a predator tearing through a place meant for safety shook both locals and officials. Many questioned why such a powerful animal had been allowed so close to families. The reintroduction program, already a subject of debate, now faced harsh judgment from both residents and visitors. Anger rose as parents demanded answers, their voices carrying as strongly as their grief. For them, the image of a fence torn aside by sheer force was proof that boundaries between people and predators had grown too thin. In the following days, the resort remained closed, its terraces marked with broken furniture and claw scars gouged into wood. Rangers tracked the animals' prints back into the forest, their rifles ready, yet the wilderness swallowed the trail quickly. Officials spoke of new measures, stronger barriers, and stricter rules, but for many the damage was already done. Trust in the idea of coexistence had cracked as sharply as the cafe tables splintered under the bears' paws. For the families who had been there, the memory lingered sharper than any scar on the buildings. The sound of tables smashing, the roar that rolled across the square, and the sight of one man standing to protect his child would never leave them. The tragedy was not only marked by loss, but also by the reminder that even in public spaces, danger can break through without warning. Usuri Krai's winter beauty remained, but its heart carried the shadow of that afternoon, a lesson carved into the snow by strength no fence could hold. August 12, 2025, opened with gray skies hanging over the wild coast of Alaska's Kodiak Peninsula. The waters of a narrow channel ran cold and fast between sharp rocks, where seabirds circled overhead and the smell of salt carried with the wind. On that morning, Hannah Carter paddled her kayak slowly along the shoreline, stopping often to collect samples for her salmon study. She had spent many summers in these places, learning the waterways, the tides, and the delicate balance of fish and streams. Her gear lay neatly packed, jars and tools secured in the small craft. To her, the day was just another step in a long project, the quiet work of science among untamed lands. But even the best plans can shift when the wilderness answers with its own force. The cliffs above her began to groan as loose stones rattled down, striking the river with splashes. The noise cut across the channel like a drumbeat, and from the trees along the bank something stirred. Out of the shifting branches, a Kodiak bear of massive size broke through, its bulk shaking brush aside as if it were nothing. Startled by the rockfall and the human scent, the beast moved with sudden speed, eyes locked on the kayak floating just yards away. Its paws sank deep into the muddy bank, and then with a burst of motion, it plunged into the river. The water split around its chest as it swam powerfully, churning waves that struck against the slender craft. Hannah gripped the rim, fighting to keep balance as the world turned to chaos. The kayak rocked hard, its bow lifting with every surge. A cooler of samples flew into the current, glass clinking before vanishing beneath the surface. The beast slammed its shoulder against the side, its force enough to push the small craft sideways toward jagged rocks. Each strike sent sprays of icy water over her arms, soaking through her jacket and chilling her to the bone. The animal's claws raked the surface, each swipe close enough to slice through wood had the boat been larger. The kayak groaned, its frame bending as Hannah shifted her weight, pressing low to keep from being flipped into the torrent. Her heart hammered as her hands burned from clinging to the cold rim, her breath short in the heavy mist that clung to the channel. The thought of falling in, of being trapped in freezing water with the beast's strength just feet away, drove terror sharper than any storm. She reached for the small case strapped near her seat, water pouring over her legs as the bear struck again. The kayak tilted dangerously, one edge dipping low, nearly pulling her under. Desperation fueled her as she fumbled for the flare gun, her fingers shaking. The predator's roar thundered across the water, a sound of raw power that rattled the stones along the bank. With one last surge, the creature struck hard, causing the kayak to spin. Hannah lifted the flare and fired, the streak of red blazing through the mist. The light cracked through the air, searing the eyes of the charging animal. The beast halted mid-surge, water churning around its frame as it recoiled. With a frustrated growl, it turned, paddling back toward the shoreline. Its wet fur clung heavily to its sides, claws scraping mud as it hauled itself from the water. The trees swallowed it once more, the forest echoing faintly with its retreat. Hannah gasped for breath, her arms trembling, her craft half swamped, gear scattered, and the river rushing past as though nothing had happened. The fight for survival was not yet over. August 12, 2025, did not end with the red flare vanishing into the fog. Hannah Carter sat shaking in her half-flooded kayak, her arms stiff, her breath shallow, and her body soaked by the icy river. The beast had vanished into the trees, but the echoes of its roar still lingered across the channel. Water pooled at her feet, and the scattered remains of her samples drifted away, lost in the current. The fight for her life had ended, yet survival demanded more than just watching the shoreline grow silent again. Every stroke of her paddle had to carry her away from that bank and closer to safety before exhaustion could drag her under. She steadied her vessel, forcing it to face downstream. The craft felt heavier, weighted not only with water but with the sharp memory of what had just happened. Her muscles burned as she worked the paddle, each pull carving ripples into the channel. The air carried a bitter chill, and every gust cut through her drenched clothes. Shivering made her arms weaker, but she pressed onward, knowing the current could push her into jagged rocks if she faltered. Her eyes never left the shore, where shadows still clung, as if the animal might return at any moment. By the time she reached a wider bend in the water, the light was already dimming. Mist hung low over the surface, and the outlines of distant ridges blurred into gray. She dragged the kayak onto the gravel, collapsing beside it as her legs gave out. Her body trembled not only from cold, but from the weight of shock, her heartbeat still quick from the rush of fear. Blood oozed from cuts on her palms where the rim had scraped skin, and bruises darkened across her shoulders where she had clung too tightly. The flare gun lay empty beside her, its barrel blackened from the single desperate shot that had bought her life. When dawn touched the horizon, she pushed onward toward her base camp, her movements slow and stiff. The journey back carried no ease, each stroke feeling heavier than the last. At camp, she stumbled onto the bank, pulling her soaked gear from the kayak and collapsing near her tent. Hours later, colleagues arrived after noticing the signal flare and the delay in her return. They found her weak, chilled, and battered, though alive. In the following days, doctors treated her for mild hypothermia and deep bruising. Cuts were cleaned and bound, her hands wrapped tightly to prevent infection. Though her body would recover, her mind carried sharper wounds. The memory of claws striking the water, the sudden crash against her vessel, and the silence afterward replayed whenever she closed her eyes. She realized that narrow waterways, often thought safe compared to open sea or cliffside rivers, could become traps when beasts as large as Kodiak bears entered without warning. News of the incident spread quickly across research stations and local villages. Many saw it as a warning that even seasoned field experts were never fully secure in Alaska's untamed places. Wildlife officials reminded crews to travel with multiple safeguards, including flares, noise deterrents, and communication devices, as encounters could happen anywhere. Food, sound, or sudden movement drew a predator close. For Hannah, the kayak and scattered samples were reminders of the fragile line between study and survival. The scar across her palm and the ruined equipment marked the cost of one encounter, but the lesson cut deeper than flesh. In Alaska's waters, even knowledge and caution could not erase risk. What saved her was not strength, but the ability to act in the few seconds when hesitation would have ended everything. March 9th, 2024, opened with heavy fog drifting across the frozen seas of Svalbard, blurring the line between ice and sky. Researcher Ingrid Olsen had set up her survey on a drifting floe, her tools spread across the uneven surface as she tracked seals for her study. The silence of the Arctic wrapped around her, broken only by the faint crack of shifting ice. Years of fieldwork had taught her to respect the dangers of the polar regions, but that day brought a threat unlike any she had faced before. From the mist, a hulking white form took shape, silent at first, then unmistakable. A massive polar bear drawn close by the scent of food and movement. The floe was small, unstable beneath her boots, and each step sent faint groans through the frozen sheet. Ingrid froze as the predator advanced, its bulk shaking the fragile ice. With a sudden swipe, the bear's paw struck the surface, splintering shards upward and spraying freezing water around her. The noise echoed across the barren expanse, a brutal reminder of how little ground she had left. The floe rocked and cracked, threatening to break apart beneath the weight of the animal and her own desperate movements. She scrambled backward, her boots slipping on wet ice as the bear pressed closer. Its breath steamed into the air, hot against the cold, each exhale carrying the power of the Arctic's top predator. Shards of frozen spray cut her cheeks as another blow smashed against the floe, water seeping up through the fractures. With no weapon, she reached for a nearby supply crate, pulling it into her arms as a barrier. The wooden box felt fragile against the force before her, but it was the only shield she had. The bear circled, pawing at the crate, claws scraping wood, its body swaying with restless hunger. Ingrid braced, her knuckles white as she held tight, each impact threatening to tear the crate from her grasp. The floe shifted violently, tilting with every step the bear made, and her heels slid dangerously close to the jagged edge. Below, black water gurgled, swirling with ice chunks that promised instant death if she fell. Every second stretched like hours, the storm of adrenaline pounding louder than the beast's growls. The predator tested her with repeated swipes, smashing through the outer edges of the floe until icy water sprayed over her boots. Her arms ached under the weight of the crate. but she did not let go. Time seemed endless, her body shaking, her breath shallow as the bear prowled. Then, faint but real, a sound broke through the haze of fear, the distant hum of a snowmobile. The animal paused, its ears twitching, its head turning toward the far-off rumble. For the first time since it appeared, its focus shifted away from her. Still braced behind the crate, Ingrid dared not move. Her eyes locked on the predator as it sniffed the air, snorted, and slowly backed toward the mist. The ice groaned under the loss of its weight, leaving her gasping in the silence that followed. She remained frozen in place, soaked, battered, and trembling, knowing that the fight for survival was not finished yet. The day had not yet finished testing Ingrid Olsen. Even after the white shadow drifted back into the mist, the flow still swayed beneath her boots, weakened by the predator's weight and split with jagged cracks that seeped icy water. Her arms shook as she lowered the crate, the wood slick with frost, her knuckles raw from gripping it too tightly. The silence was thick and heavy, broken only by the faint rumble of a snowmobile echoing from the distance. She stood frozen, waiting for proof that the bear had truly gone. Minutes stretched before she dared move. Each step across the slick surface felt like a gamble, the flow rocking beneath her weight. Her boots were soaked, water seeping through to her skin, every touch of cold cutting deeper than before. She crouched, forcing herself to breathe steadily as she checked her pack, but most of her supplies had already slipped into the black water. The Arctic gave no second chances, and she knew the loss of food, warmth, and gear could weigh as heavily as the presence of the predator itself. The snowmobile hum grew closer, faint streaks of sound carrying across the frozen expanse. Ingrid turned her head toward it, relief mixing with dread. She waved her arms, hoping the distant team might see her, but her movements rocked the flow dangerously. Fractures splintered outward, a jagged crack racing beneath her feet and forcing her to lunge backward. Her body hit the ice hard, the shock sending pain through her ribs. For a terrifying moment, she thought the flow would split apart entirely. The sound of engines finally pierced through the fog, clearer now, joined by faint flashes of light reflecting across the ice. The bear's earlier presence still haunted the air, every gust of wind carrying its scent, but the attention of the predator was gone. At last, figures on snowmobiles emerged, their shapes cutting through the haze. The rescuers slowed as they approached the fractured flow, cautious of the shifting surface beneath them. One tossed a rope across the ice, and Ingrid caught it with trembling hands. The pull dragged her across uneven cracks until she stumbled onto firmer ground, her body heavy with exhaustion. She collapsed into the snow, her breath clouding the air in shallow bursts. Her clothes were soaked, her skin pale from the cold, but she was alive. The rescuers wrapped her in thick blankets, the warmth sharp against her frozen body. As they secured her onto the sled, her gaze drifted back toward the flow. The deep claw marks gouged into the ice, and the splintered edges where the bear had struck remained as reminders of how close she had come to vanishing. Back at the research station, medics cleaned her raw hands and checked for frostbite. Bruises lined her ribs, her shoulders ached, and her body shook from shock, yet the marks on her skin seemed small compared to the weight in her memory. News of the attack spread quickly through the small Arctic community, sparking debate about safety in such remote environments. Scientists reminded each other that food scents, even faint ones, could travel for miles and lure predators across ice. For Ingrid, the lesson was carved into her mind as sharply as the scars left on the flow. She had faced the Arctic's greatest predator not with weapons, but with a crate and endurance. The bear had vanished back into the fog, but its power lingered. She would never forget the sound of ice breaking beneath its weight, the spray of freezing water at her feet, and the realization that in the far north, even a scientist with years of experience could find herself one heartbeat from the end.